This show comes to you from the Art of Change Skills for Life. Visit www.artofchange.com to explore how you might grow your communication and leadership skills through workshops, coaching, and more. Plus, you get to work with me. Today on the Change podcast, I am not alone. I am joined by my husband and super fan of the holiday of Halloween, Eric Nepom.
Hello.
Honey, what's something that you want the listeners of the Change podcast to know about you?
Gosh, I love Halloween. I think the weather's great, especially out here in Oregon. It's just a little aspect of spooky and dark and rainy and not.
Do you like feeling scared?
No, I like feeling suspense. If you've got me on the edge of my seat in anticipation, absolutely. How about you?
I like candy. We are joined by a very special guest. He's an actor with over 18 years of experience performing and teaching improvised theater in his home base of Austin, Texas.
You know, you can be found throughout all sorts of mediums. He's got several commercials under his belt. He can be found in the Netflix television series The Mortified Guide. And he also gives some very impressive ghost tours.
In fact, we took his virtual ghost tour this Thursday, and we were really impressed. So it's actually why we've invited him here today. Today's guest is Kevin Miller. I'm Aden Nepom.
Oh, and I'm Eric Nepom.
And this is a special Halloween edition of The Change Podcast. Woo! Kevin Miller, thank you for joining us on the Changed podcast.
Thank you for inviting me.
So you gave a super sweet virtual ghost tour on Thursday. Thank you for doing that. We were there.
I'm glad you were watching. That was awesome. I couldn't quite keep track of like all the people with all the telling the stories, but that was a lot of fun. More than I thought it would be.
There was like 40 people there.
Yeah, and we made a nice, gorgeous dinner. Sat at a table and watched you walk around a chilly Austin.
That's great.
Comfy from our end.
Yeah, and that was pretty consistent too. There were still like 35 people there at the very end of the tour. It was wild.
Oh yeah. It was really cool.
Well, as somebody who didn't live in Austin, it's one of those things where it's so great to hear a different town's ghost story and know it's totally different, and yet there's still old history and similarities here and there.
Right. Fun to catch the similar vibe that they have, and yeah, it's really neat. And it's interesting from one town to the next. Like I've taken New Orleans' ghost tour, and they're so gothic and macabre, and they're just like custom geared to the vibe of that town.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And Portland's young. Our ghost stories aren't old ghost stories.
I definitely took a ghost tour in Seattle. I'm trying to like the Seattle Underground tour.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I feel like maybe I took one in Portland. I don't remember.
How long have you been doing those ghost tours? Because to be clear, just so everyone knows, that's not your job.
No, that does not pay any bills.
Your real job does, but
yeah. It was probably 2003, plus or minus 1 year, because Janine, who ran the tours, was married to Sean, who ran the Hideout Theater, where I did improv, and you would literally check in for either seeing an improv show or taking a ghost tour from the same ticket booth. And so one day I just chatted her one good ghost story I had heard, and she responded with 10 good ghost stories she had heard. And before you knew it, I was taking the tours and giving the tours, and I liked it just as much as improv, but it also paid some money as opposed to nothing. So it was a winner. So for a while, I had like a brief break from improv while I was doing ghost tours on the evenings instead, and it was a lot of fun. Halloween would be super, super busy, and I dug the stories. And every time you give a tour, somebody else comes up and says, the story that happened to them. And it's a lot of fun.
That is awesome. It's also a little micro story of like a little micro fork in the road story. You could have easily just kept doing improv on Halloween's and never been a ghost tour guide.
And just
or the other way around.
Yeah,
You could have just become no longer a performer in any way, shape, or form and just giving ghost tours.
Full-time
Yeah.
ghost guy.
Yeah, there's certainly performance elements to it, and you see different people go different ways. Like some people are just like doing a constant bit, like they're just putting on this goofy, over-the-top character the entire time that they're doing the tours. And cool, if that works for you. What works for me is to just be me talking in this exact cadence in this exact way, and winning people over, like spooking them out by being like, this is just a dude telling me a thing that happened. Like it has a certain veracity to it in that way, where it doesn't sound like I'm trying to win you over with a crazy, thing.
In your experience along those lines,
Mm-hmm.
you feel that ghost stories can be told any time of year because of that?
Yeah, I mean, if you're into it, and we all should be, I mean, it would the 50% of our revenue for the year would be within 6 weeks of Halloween. But yeah, I mean, I was down to clown any time of year, and it's super great because ghosts don't care if it's Halloween. Ghosts will show up any old time. And
Right. I mean, you get into the holiday
Ghosts.
tradition back in the day. The winter time was the scary stories. You didn't tell the happy
Right.
Santa stories. You told the Dickens stories, right?
The Dickens stories. That's a good way to put it. Mm-hmm,
Yeah.
mm-hmm.
So I'm just,
So, yeah.
it's beautiful out. It's springtime. It's about to be June. It's sunny and bright until late at night.
Mm-hmm.
Do you still want a ghost
Well,
story?
I mean, in South Korea, I lived there for a couple of years. Scary stories were reserved for summertime because they have a chilling effect. And so they would share scary stories, and all the horror movies come out in the summertime, so that you can consume chilling material
To keep you cool.
to keep you cool in the hot months.
They're worried about the fan death in Korea, so
That's right.
you gotta find other ways to keep cool.
That's right. Oh, that's true. That's the fan death. That's a thing that they are definitely worried about, which is literally like this idea that having a ceiling fan on in your room while you're sleeping that will kill you.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you not heard
that
of this?
simple.
It's wild.
Wow.
It
No.
was such a pervasive superstition that like the Consumer Products Board of Korea had warnings about it, and like fans that you buy in Korea will have a timer or an auto switch or something so that you won't fall asleep with a fan running.
Are we talking about all fans?
Yeah.
So box fan built
Yeah.
in wall.
Yes.
Don't fall asleep with a fan running in your room. And I get the vibe that like the latest generation might finally be growing out of it, just from a few anecdotal things. But yeah, it's one of those just bizarrely constant superstitions.
Some of my favorite horror and ghost stories are from that region.
Yeah.
And I think why I think they are fun and interesting is because there are so many that are plastic surgery related. And which is like, beauty is heavily prized culturally. And
Sure.
and there's, at least when I was living there in 2003 and 2004, plastic surgery was like a super common thing that was happening. People getting their eyelids done and
Okay.
and smiles enhanced. And so there was this story of the red mask, who it was a plastic surgery accident. She was slashed all the way, from ear to ear to give her a bigger smile by like,
Joker style.
depending on who tells the story, either a plastic surgery accident or a like devilish surgeon, an evil surgeon. But she was so vain and so terrible and like so concerned with her beauty that like this death, she bled to death, was terrible. But that's not even the scary part. The scary part is she might appear to you in a mirror when you're looking in the mirror. And if she right, with the bleeding smile, and if she, and like stitched together, whatever, terribly, if she appears to you in the mirror and she asks you if she's beautiful, if you say yes, she slices you across your face.
I would have guessed that would be the right answer.
If you say no, she cuts your neck. It's a no-win ghost story.
Is this like one of those, one of us always tells the truth and the other always lies? Is there like some sneaky way you can answer this?
I mean, I imagine the sneaky way is to leave. Just be like, that's not my face in the mirror. Goodbye.
You get to make that decision for yourself. It's 2020. You get to decide if you're beautiful. Don't be judging on other people's choices to make your choice.
No.
What's one of your
I,
favorite ghost stories, Kevin?
my favorite is the one that I tell about the Driscoll Hotel, about the two women who came to Austin for the big Stinking Comedy Festival in '99. And I'll try to compress this a bit. It's a nice sprawling story, but they saw a woman in the middle of the night walking with a bunch of shopping bags down the hallway of the part of the hotel that was under renovation. And they
And
thought
this is a very old.
Yeah, the Driscoll
Right.
Hotel's like the oldest fancy hotel in
Yeah,
Austin.
you don't get these spooky stories about the Ramada Inn. It's always the old dramatic,
He had
nicely
run out
decorated.
of cigarettes.
But so they see the woman with the shopping bags walking down on the fourth floor, and they were very specific about the fourth floor, the corner room, which turns out to be room 427. And they confirmed with the concierge that no, there's no one staying on this end of the hotel. And so that was all that they told Janine, was like, we had this weird experience where we saw a lady with shopping bags on the fourth floor in the middle of the night. And later, it turns out that 10 years prior to that, a woman had come into the Driscoll Hotel, used her ex's credit card to book a room at this nice, expensive hotel, and had gone on a spending spree with a bunch of stuff, and carried the stuff with all the shopping bags back to the room they had checked her into, which was 427, right there on the fourth floor in the corner, and killed herself in that room. And what I love about it is, like, it's spooky, but then you think about it for a second, you're like, wait, those ladies had no idea about that history, that story, when they told us that. And, it's that kind of cross-checking aspect of it that freaks me out, because it's so easy for me to just be like, no, there's no such thing as ghosts, it's silly. But when I hear something like that, then my superstitious part of my brain gets tickled, and I'm like, oh my God. And yeah, it excites me. I love that stuff.
Well, that brings up the question of, do you believe in ghosts? You kind of have hinted that you might or might not. What's your theory of what is happening there?
No, I mean, the short answer is no. I like Mythbusters, I like science, and all that, and but the long answer is that I don't know. I've heard stories about, like, a particular place, like the same story from multiple people who don't know each other and don't know that something is supposed to happen there. I had a good friend who, Christy, who would swear up and down that there's no such thing as ghosts, but stuff had always happened to her. Like, she had a dozen different stories of freaky stuff that had happened to her specifically. And she would always begin and end her story with, but there's no such thing as ghosts, and I liked that. I liked how she just had an antenna for the stuff that she didn't want. So, I don't know. I'm not going to do some theory that goes against all the laws of physics as they understand them. But I also, I don't think there's anything wrong with just enjoying the story and speculating. Maybe there's people out there, I think the problem with superstition is whenever you use it to influence your decisions in life, and you join a cult or something, like, or when your belief in religion leads you to apply your prejudices politically, like, that's where it breaks down. But when it comes to just having a superstition about, holy crap, yeah, this makes no logical sense, but it's just kind of fun to be on board with, then I say thumbs up. And that might reflect my attitude about ghost stories. It's just more fun to buy into, like, there's something going on there. So, yeah.
What are your thoughts on why we put ourselves in this scenario? I mean, we could talk. I mean, as a man of science myself, right? There's the aspect of, great, we put ourselves in a scared position because we want to be prepared for us to be scared. So when we are truly scared, we are ready to fight or flight or flee. We put ourselves in a position where we can be influenced by you, a storyteller, in the middle of the night in the location where the scary thing's happening.
Right. Yeah. Enamored with the charm of being scared.
So why put us there?
I remember watching Paranormal Activity alone in the dark, and, like, have not seen it. And, like, at the end of the movie, no spoilers, but there's, like, a moment where you can tell there's a jump scare coming, right at the end of the movie. And I remember sitting on the couch and, like, holding up a pillow in front of my face, like between me and the TV, to like block whatever jump scare I knew was coming. And I was like, what am I doing? This behavior of mine right now makes no sense, that I'm making myself watch this and then stopping myself. So yeah, it's bizarre behavior that we do. And I don't know, and like with roller coasters and whatnot, I think there might be something about the ability to experience danger without being in danger that appeals to
Ooh.
us. Like, I read a thing about why tickling is funny, why we laugh when we're tickled, and it could be that there's something inherent to the attack that doesn't actually have a threat attached to it. And the laughing is, I forget how the article put it. It was much smarter than I'm sounding right now, but just the release of that innocent attack was something that appeals to you. So
Yeah,
that's why you laugh
interesting.
at, and that's why you enjoy a spooky movie or spooky story.
I love that you bring up tickling because I took a dive down tickling years ago
Oh
as
yeah,
a young
A
college-based
dive into tickling.
scientist.
dive into
Because
tickling.
It
That's
just
a
makes it
totally
sound like
different
you were
podcast.
yeah.
chasing people around, tickling them.
Well, for that reason, I was, why do we get ticklish? And there's a lot of great studies about how, there's the primal aspect that you have the bug on you, and
Mhm.
that your body reacts to feeling the tiny bug on your body that shouldn't be there, and so you brush it away or whatever, which has a
Mhm.
level of
Mhm.
creepiness to
Mhm.
it. So
Right.
what's connecting to my brain when you said that was, okay, so we've got the ticklishness, the creepy sensation, the hairs in the back of our neck when we get a little in an odd, unfamiliar place. And then there's bugs, which we are bred genetically
Mhm.
to have a slight fear of as far as the look goes.
That's wild.
Uh, so right, you got insects and bugs that are traditionally creepy.
Mhm.
You've got a
Mhm.
ticklish factor here. And yet
Yeah.
there's ghosts and ghouls, which are people.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
they're not the creepy thing that we naturally just go ugh and
But
have a fear of.
but it's the unnatural.
Hmm.
I
You know
think there's an
it.
intrigue with the unnatural. Like there's a fascination with things that are different from us. That
Mhm.
um,
The
yeah.
uncanny valley plays into that, like the idea that
Hmm.
something is us but not quite. And normally it's describing appearance, like creepy CGI characters or whatever, but it could also
Sure.
apply to people that aren't quite people. They're in the beyond, but they still have enough. And then maybe this is a Western thing, because I know other cultures, you ghosts aren't necessarily just your grandma that stuck around the house.
Right.
But yeah, in the Western culture, it's like it's people, but they're removed from us through the veil of whatever. And yeah, that might contribute to the feeling.
So this might be trying to shoehorn one topic into another, but generally speaking, what we focus on this show is the
Right.
broad idea of what does it mean to change, to be
Hmm.
changed, to
Yeah.
inspire changes in others. That's what the focus typically is. And
Right.
I'm throwing it out there. Is there a relationship? Do you think there's a relationship between either the existence of ghosts, what they go through, right? There are all these stories of people who's,
I
like
mean, there's no
their
greater change
lives,
than dying.
right, their lives are changed forever and that they no longer have a corporeal
Corporeal.
Corporeal.
presence.
Yeah,
But
no,
yeah,
it's
I mean, I wonder, it's like it's is there some like r- reluctance to change, to go from living to dead, that would cause ghosts to stay
uh
and be.
Yeah, the theory is that they've got unfinished business and whatever. And I've never necessarily bought that. I think, like, all right, let's just assume ghosts are true for the next
Oh yeah,
answer.
for the sake of
Yeah.
this
For,
conversation, I think
for
we
the
should
sake of this
assume.
conversation, ghosts are a real thing. And I've always heard you hear stories about unfinished business and they're back for vengeance and whatever. To the extent of the ghost stories I've heard, the plausible sounding ones, the people, the firsthand accounts I've heard, it's
Mhm.
never had that vibe. It's never had that vibe of like, and then they put me on a mission and I understood that I had to go here and tell their aunt that, it doesn't seem to be like that. But that's the stories that appeal to us, is that we want to
Yeah.
assign a reason to their being, a story related reason and a character related reason. I've always thought the Sixth Sense adhered closer to how I understood ghosts to be, that they're just people going about their business, that don't necessarily even realize that there's anything different, and might become frustrated or whenever people aren't responding to them, and might start to do little
Yeah.
tricks or whatever to make themselves known and to make those kinds of connections. But yeah, when it comes to change, but also in general, I think whenever it's more interesting to ponder our reaction to them and how we in the living world, the real world, I'm making air quotes, we in the real world respond to them.
A theme that came up through a couple of the stories that we heard on Thursday, where people turn and they just say something to the ghost and the ghost knocks the bad behavior off. Like, you told a story of a music artist who simply wanted to go to sleep, and this ghost was like turning lights on and off, if we believe
Mm,
ghosts are real. And
yes,
she essentially was like, look, I need to get some sleep. Okay, thank you, I get
yes,
whatever's going on here, fine, but like
yes,
I need to go to sleep. And then they
yeah.
knocked the behavior off and she went to sleep,
Right.
or
Jeanette
the lights stopped.
Napolitano was who that was lead singer of Concrete Blonde. And yeah, she just like, she tried to connect with the ghost and in that case worked. Yeah, I like that notion that it's possible to make a connection with somebody who's on the other side of the craziness. And that's another appeal. Nobody wants to die. Nobody wants to, just be gone forever. And if you, even less so if you don't believe in an afterlife. And so the idea
Right.
that there might be something that you might be, on the other side of it, trying to poke through the veil, is appealing to people. I have a book called Ghost Hunters by Deborah Bloom. And it's a nonfiction book about this 19th century group of academics who formed a society to investigate and debunk seances and
Mm-hmm.
psychics. And there were just all the rage. Seances were crazy back at the end of the 19th century. Everybody went to one all the time on a Saturday night, and they succeeded. Like, they very easily knocked off so many of these charlatans and silly behavior, like they're just tugging on a string to make the handkerchief move across the table. But on multiple occasions, they ran into psychics that they could not debunk, like that they just ran into a wall and were absolutely unable to, like, they just threw all these experiments at them and put them under controlled conditions. And that's fascinating to me. And maybe the people were just that good, or maybe there's something that's there behind the 99% of nonsense, that we're exposed to.
um Here's so normally I also invite people to tell a story, a fork in the road story from their own lives. But
This is
Kevin,
not
I'm
a
wondering,
normal podcast.
this is a special Halloween ghost story podcast. So I'm wondering, Kevin, do you have any personal stories that have caused you to maybe shift your own thinking about these
Spiritual.
unnatural, yeah, spiritual,
Spiritual
unnatural,
things.
hard to explain phenomenon?
It's hard to pinpoint one because I just would vacillate back and forth so easily between, oh, this is obvious nonsense, just because a minority of these seem very plausible. Well, that doesn't, the fact that 90% of them are so silly means that that's probably, the case. And so that would be my attitude. And then I would hear some story about some situation or whatever, and I'd be like, whoa, maybe is there something happening here? Like, is the 90% nonsense reflective of something that's small? The story I told that you heard on the tour that I gave, about the Adelie North, the piano playing girl. The the story itself I don't necessarily connect with, but just what happened while I was telling it was what really like
Mm-hmm.
spooked me, if that's the word. The North Evans house, which anyone may Google, is a historic home in Austin, and it was originally called Bellevue, and this wealthy family lived there, and their daughter, Adelie North, Natalie without the N, Adelie North, had died at a young age. And after she had died, many spooky occurrences were reported there, of footsteps up and down the stairs and so on. And one of the consistent stories that you would hear, third hand from people, was the sound of a girl playing the piano, which Adelie was known to be good at the piano. And I thought, like, that's fine, but that fell into the category of a typical ghost story I've heard, which is people say that this happens. You know, just the farther removed it is, the more it's like, yeah, people say a lot of things. People say Bigfoot. Um, and that's how a lot of us feel, I think, you know, with our skeptical brains is, well, it hasn't happened to me. So therefore, you know, which is healthy. And excuse me. And the long and the short of the story of Adelie North is that the building was no longer haunted. Like I had talked repeatedly to people who worked in the present day at that building, and none of them had a story. And they're like, yeah, I've always heard that, but nothing has ever really happened here. And so I would describe the building as a no longer haunted building. And then one night we were finishing the tour, or I think the first time it happened, we were walking away from the house where I had told this story and where I had described the house as no longer haunted. And somebody came up to me as we walked away, and they said, "Hey, man, I know, you know, back there with the piano girl. While we were walking up to that house, I heard somebody playing a piano inside that house." And I'm like, you got me. You know, I just didn't like. I had such a skeptical brain. You know, I was just like, all right, cool. You know, and then a couple weeks later, a month later, somebody else came up to me at the end of the tour, and they were like, "Hey, dude, I'm not this kind of guy, but when we walked up to that house with the girl who played the piano, before you even said anything, there was definitely somebody playing piano inside the house." And again, I'm like, downtown is noisy, you know, there's plenty of ways, so staying very skeptical about it. And then it happened a third time, and then it happened a fourth time. And like each time, and it chipped away at my skepticism. But I think I was just being resistant because I liked the end of my story. I liked having like an Adelie's spirit has moved on, and you know, wrapped that story in a bow, and I liked it that way for the purposes of my tour. But yeah, this doubt is starting to creep into my mind of, I guess, double doubt. I'm starting to doubt my doubt about the story. And then finally one night I gave a private tour to this group of photographers for their meetup. They were just taking a ghost tour, and it's the exact same as my normal tour, but just photos are being taken all night. And I gathered there, and I told the story of Adelie North at the North Evans house, and we moved on. And the next morning, this guy, one of them, emailed me a picture that he had taken of us standing on that porch. And distinctly in the doorway, directly behind where I had been standing, you can see a girl in the shadow of the door, like a human figure, very distinct. And I did the Photoshop enhance and you know, couldn't detect any copy paste things. It's a very eerie sight. And if it had been any one of these situations, then I would have said, okay, well, there's certainly an explanation for that. But when you combine all the stories I had heard about the place with the 4 different instances of people saying that they had heard piano music inside the house, and finally when I got that picture, I was like, okay, you know, you win, Adelie. So yeah, so that's an interesting, you know, I'm in constant struggle in that way, as I said, and that's a perfect encapsulation of how I never know how credulous to be when it comes to this stuff. And we live in an age where superstition is being used in a very bad way, you know, and unscientific thought is not cool right now, especially not cool right now. So I want to preserve my healthy skepticism while also having a wondrous feeling of what if, you know, happening.
First of all, thank you. I love that story.
I mean, there's something that when you said they took a photo and showed me, I knew what you were about to say. And yet even that, still, I got a little chill-esque feeling in my body of that same, like, is this real? And I knew the answer. I knew the whole thing. I've seen the image.
Well, there we go. It is our fascination with the unknown, you know, and this is an attitude that I've had across many different things, is that I love that there are mysteries in the world that we will never know the answer to. I like that, which is ironic because I love the solution of solving a puzzle, and or if something is really confusing me and you have that click feeling in your brain, you're like, oh, that's where I put my keys, you know, of course, because when I was standing there, I set the keys down there. So I like that feeling, but I also, contrary wise, enjoy the feeling of like, well, just never know some things, and it's okay because it's a mysterious universe we live in, and that's part of what makes it great, you know.
So you kind of come to the conclusion that you don't need to know if ghosts are real to enjoy ghost stories. It's totally
Right.
plausible that it's all easily explained with some scientific method we haven't identified yet.
Sure.
And
And what
it's cool. Either it could go either way. That'd be fine.
I always encourage, I always end my tours by encouraging people to not just be like, skepticism is great, but don't be so skeptical that you miss out on the fun of the story and you miss out on like the fact that the story reminds us of the history behind these buildings and the people that have been here before us. And like, that's the magic of it that anyone can connect to. And so no matter how, arms crossed and, oh, that's not real, you want to be, well, you're kind of missing out on your, come join us in the fun place, and because there's value in that. That's, not, that doesn't require you to just be a credulous idiot who believes any ghost story you've ever heard, so trying to strike that balance, I guess.
That's fair. That's fair.
And now I'm moving to a super haunted 1,000-year-old city, so that'll be a whole new world.
So you have a huge change. We're talking mostly today about ghosts and ghostly stories because it's the time of year for it and it's super fun. But also, Kevin, you are literally in the middle of a fork in the road moment in your real life. You're
Yeah.
like, this is the beginning chapter of a story right now. Will you tell us a little bit about what's happening and your decision-making process there?
Yeah, I met a girl, as these stories often begin, and yeah, my girlfriend Kiki lives in Amsterdam, and we've been doing long distance for a good long while, longer than any reasonable long distance couple should endure. But I'm finally making the big change and moving there, and it's a wild, like, a year ago, I probably told somebody like, no, there's no way I would ever move there. Maybe it's, I guess it was over a year ago that I was just starting to like, all right, we will end up in the same place one way or the other. And then it became evident, no, she is not going to be moving here. Thanks, America. Like that just wasn't realistic. And so I just started to slowly open myself up to the possibility of moving there. And I've never lived outside of Texas my entire life, let alone outside of the U.S. So this is a huge change for me. But yeah, I'm going to be with my girlfriend who's amazing and her cat who's also amazing. And I'm excited about this just wild. I'm quitting my job after 18 years. So like
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's a stunning
Are you
shift.
allowed to tell people where your job, like I've been wanting to say where you work, but I
Oh
just didn't
yeah,
know what the rules are.
Apple is the answer. I've been working at Apple for 18 years. And yeah, it's great. I've been an Apple fan since I played with the Macintosh when I was 10 years old. And so it's been a tremendous gift to my professional life for that to be my career. And it's been a very golden handcuffs thing because if you get a job at Apple, like why the hell would you leave? But yeah, which was my attitude for a long time. And I started to get a bit of senioritis about it. And I started to realize, like not only that, but Apple is a pretty cool resume, thing to hand to somebody for future possibilities. And so, yeah, just all of that combined with all the reasons that I would want to go to Amsterdam. And the year 2020 did a bang up job of showing me the door. Like, you're not even like, it's not like I'm going out to improv shows and bars and restaurants and so on. So, there's a third angle at which it makes sense to take this big leap. Yeah, it's a wild time at the beginning of a recession and I'm just let's check my privilege. Like I'm so lucky, so privileged to be able to make a shift like this and not be just worried about my next meal and so forth.
Sure.
So that's cool. And it's been a privileged thing to have a long distance relationship like this in the first place, where we can occasionally see each other. So I'm very excited. It's going to be the adventure of a lifetime, and get to spend time with Kiki, my girlfriend, and figure out what's next.
Yeah, there should be some pretty old ghosts there, I would think. It seems to me that ghost stories, there's no real like statute of limitations on age of ghost or whatever. Like, oh, 300 years is the cutoff.
But you also don't get a lot of young ones. I mean, like here we are. Like I said, we're in Portland. We're in a younger town for ghost stories. We're not like, well, old Billy over there tried to start a .com and he died.
Well, okay, but the story from Big Stinking Comedy Festival, like that ghost was a 10-year-old,
80s,
10-year-old
ghost. Yeah. 80s ghost.
Yeah, because Big Stinking was in the 90s.
True, but I will say the crime and the story around the person was not. It could have been any time, right? It's a person. She left her husband. She had grocery bags.
She had credit card.
Oh, it was a credit card. It's true.
It was a credit card shopping spree.
Those classic Dickens stories and their
exactly the credit card. I think that was 1989. I think that was not to the day 10 years before, but I think it was 10 years before the women had their crazy experience. So
I mean, but I take your point. It's not like you hear about some accident on the freeway and then like the next day people are hearing voices on the freeway.
They didn't look both ways when they were texting and they died, and now they haunt that crosswalk.
And now anytime you drive past exit 72,
your cell service goes out.
Your cell signal. Maybe that does explain dead zones.
Dead zone. That reminds me of Large Marge in Pee-wee's Big Adventure.
Yes.
Picks up hitchhikers on the highway. I was thinking, there's no such thing as highway ghosts. Wait, there is, and it traumatized me as a child.
Yeah.
So what is it about leading up to your story, right? It's not about the punchline, right? There's that classic, and it was in the house. Right. What is it that's the scary part that leads to the actual fear that we're feeling?
Yeah, what indeed? Like, yeah, you start to like I tell the story about the women at the comedy festival and they saw the woman with the shopping bags, and you kind of think that story's wrapped up. You're like, oh, and then there was nobody staying there, but they had seen a woman. And you're like, oh, your brain is like, oh, okay, well, that was a mediocre ghost story. But then I'm like, but what those two women didn't realize is the following. And then suddenly like, oh my God. Yeah, exactly. And suddenly, and like, as improvisers, we're familiar with how the human brain just automatically tells a story. If you see a guy, a girl, and a ring, then you're like, oh, I see what's happening here, Same thing. You're like, oh, they saw a woman with shopping bags and there was nobody staying there. And what they didn't know was this. And you're like, oh, there's a woman with shopping bags who died. Like you could almost like pause the tour and then let somebody else finish it. And they'd probably get pretty close by guessing it.
My favorite thing is that you said for that story is you said that you had someone come up to you at the end of a tour where you told that story who was like, I'm staying in that room tonight.
Yes, that's right. Oh my gosh. One of the all-time favorite reactions.
And you never heard from her again, exactly. Right?
Which
probably means everything's
genuinely
fine.
Terrified. Yeah, it was probably.
I would be terrified. I mean, there's a hotel in my hometown that has several ghost stories associated with it. And there are rooms where they supposedly don't ever put guests because they are too haunted.
Too haunted. Yeah. And there you go. I'm like, I don't know. As a business, would they really, like I try to, because a lot of people tell ghost stories that are super obviously like there's have you ever heard the story about your girl's driving along, car behind her keeps flashing their lights, and then classic. She finds out, oh, there was a killer in the back seat and they were flashing their lights and the killer would hide again, and I'm like, none of that story makes sense.
but can I ask though, have you ever gotten in your car and been driving in the thing where you're like, have you ever like looked? Because I need to be honest. If I'm going to be honest between us three, I've done it. I've totally been driving and went,
is there someone in the back seat behind me?
Well, it's because I think that was like the first really scary story I learned as a kid.
Yeah.
And I remember driving, and there's been times where I'll drive and I'll go in the mirror and I'll do the look above and I'll do the look behind. I won't deny.
Oh yeah, there's nothing scarier than the possibility of being a future ghost, right? Like ghosts, encountering a ghost is a scary story, but ultimately it's like, it's just a ghost. But if I'm if I hear a story of like a woman had somebody inject poison into her foot in the parking lot as she's unlocking her car. I'm like, I'm stepping away from my car every time I unlock it for the next 6 weeks.
Yeah.
No,
You know,
and you're
so
right. And you're right. And like Eric, I'll like be driving along and just have a notion of somebody being
oh
behind me.
yeah.
And it's probably based on that. I have a, this might be getting off of like, this is a story I've heard, but I've always had an irrational fear of sitting at a bar and someone coming from behind and stabbing me in the lower back, like in the kidney area. And I don't know if I've ever heard this as a story or seen it in a movie at all. But literally, I'll be sitting there. I mean, in the before times, obviously. But I'll be sitting there at a bar, and somebody will come up behind me, and I've got them in the corner of my eye. I'm just aware of them, just in case.
And
Yeah.
it's just that one fear that you have.
It's really
That's really specific fear you have. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it does make me wonder because, it's like if you've ever heard of past life regression therapy, it's where someone would regress you through hypnosis and your brain, either you're remembering a story from a past life or your brain is fabricating a story to explain that fear. Honestly, the truth is it doesn't matter if it's real or if it's something your brain is fabricating, but the result of having told a story that explains why you have this fear relieves the tension of that fear. Past life regression therapy is fascinating.
This is like a placebo thing. Like, it doesn't matter if it's a real
It doesn't
drug.
really matter, which is why, and this comes back around to what I do when I help people, right? But through coaching and stuff, it can be really helpful to have people tell a different story. You've probably heard Brene Brown be like, what's the story you're telling yourself? Well, she's getting that from something that's very actually legitimate. It taps into perhaps the placebo effect. But the stories we tell ourselves to explain things have an element of making it up anyway. So if it's not a story that's serving you, you might as well tell a better story. So, past life regression, I do think taps into that because I've known people who had like phantom physiological issues who had past life. And by the way, I don't do past life regression therapy. I'm not I think it was a trend in the 80s, but but I've known people who had that type of experience where like they're like, I was in ancient Rome and I was killed in a hay bale. It's like with a whatever, and then they never have the pain again. Really weird, unnatural, paranormal, whatever you want to say to explain it. But I wonder if it's simply the power of the brain to tell a story that makes an impact.
I mean, we do like the stories. We like pattern matching. We've referred a few times to like what are the things that lead us at a guttural level, like evolution. How does it lead us to the point, and part of it is trying to like connect things to a pattern and solve those puzzles. And but just to reiterate what I said, like you can become obsessed over like, no, we're gonna figure this out. We're gonna get the right answer, or you can just enjoy the freaking mystery of it, which I'm a fan of, in many cases.
Well, I have to personally confess that I am disappointed that I've never seen a ghost. Like for years, I believe
never experienced either.
Nothing experienced, like nothing. Okay,
nothing. So for years I was convinced because I grew up in a pretty woo town in Southern Oregon. I was convinced that if anybody was going to experience something supernatural, it was going to be me. Like out in the world, I was definitely going to witness some things,
right?
And then the opposite thing started happening where people would complain about supernatural like experiences, and then I would be like, oh, this is my chance, and I would show up and I'm like the chiller at the poker table, like the streak would end.
Just kill it.
Or the cooler, what do they call it?
The
chiller, the chiller.
Yeah.
I sound like my grandpa.
Chiller
Everyone
works.
chill down. But I would show up and all of a sudden they'd be like, oh my God, no more ghost problems.
Oh yeah, thank you. You're basically a Ghostbuster.
Just with your pure being.
Just showing up, just being like, "Hey, are there any ghosts?"
Oh,
Hey,
and we're out.
They're like,
We're done.
"Oh, never mind."
Have you besides this photograph, have you experienced a spiritual event?
A paranormal.
Not really, like in the sense you're describing. You know, I mean, I've got small things that don't even sound that impressive when told after the fact. Like I remember one time I um, led a bunch of people upstairs at Buffalo Billiards, which is this haunted, place, and told stories until we got spooked out. And then I led a bunch of people downstairs. Probably 9 of us walked up the stairs, and 9 of us walked back down the stairs. And this connects to something I said earlier. My friend Christy, the one who's like, "There's no such thing as ghosts," but we're at the base of the stairs, having just come up and down. And my friend Christy just felt the need to open the door and look back in on the stairs. And she opened the door and looked and yelped. And we looked, and there was a full ashtray sitting on the center of the steps of the stairs. And this is a narrow stairway. And like none of us had seen this ashtray coming or going, nobody kicked it or even spotted it. And there it was a few seconds later, So yeah, it's a little stuff like that. I think the vast majority of hauntings are like little stuff that in isolation you don't think much of, but once you experience 20 things happening in the same place along those lines, you start to scratch your head because literally seeing a ghost, movie style seems to be rare / maybe never. The key story was the Thomas Wooten building on 10th near Congress in Austin. And Thomas Wooten had this hospital there, and I got to take a private tour, or I got the key to the building, and I got to go in every Saturday night and take a group into the spooky old building and tell the stories from inside. And this was an active business, and every employee at this business had wild stories about, the various things that had happened. I told a couple.
And there was it was a hospital operating room, right?
Yes, it had been a hospital. Like there was the spot where there was the old skylight in the ceiling, like, oh, this was the old operating room. And just every employee present day of that business had weird stories about, being somebody blowing on their ear or what have you. And so that is
such
the
a flirty
backdrop.
ghost.
I know. The second week, maybe it was the third week, that I was doing this little private tour thing. I took the group up to the steps and I introduced them to the building, and I said, "Now let's go inside." And I stuck the key in and managed to twist it and just snap it off in the lock with a very satisfying dink. And I was left holding the nub of the key. And I turned around with total embarrassment, like not thinking ghosts at all, just thinking, oh, I just ruined the tour. So I awkwardly did the stories from outside, which, I did my best, but it wasn't nearly as good. And we went off and finished the tour elsewhere, and I came running back the moment the tour was done, hoping I could fish the end of the key out of the lock, and found the end of the key, not in the lock where I had snapped it off, but laying on the center of the door jamb, like over by a foot, and just dead center on the door jamb. And if anyone has ever broken a key off in a lock, they know by definition that the key should be stuck in there. And I couldn't figure out how it would have fallen in just such a way. So that was wild, and a good example of, in isolation, this might be slightly odd, but with all the other stories I had heard was really odd. And then 6 weeks after that, with my brand new key, I had an instance where the key would not turn in the lock, and I was worried I was going to snap it off the second time. Like it was definitely the right key. It is not budging. And I even had people from the tour try, and none of us could get this key to go. So again, I told the stories from outside, and I said, "I'm sorry, they must have changed the lock." And as we walked off, a lady in the group said, "Do you want to try it one more time?" And I was like, okay. And I stuck it in, and click, it just opened right up, like absolutely effortless. And at which point, all the tourists wanted to go into the building, and I was like, "Guys, this is you've seen movies before, right? Like we're all gonna die." So I'm begrudgingly like, "Okay, we can let's everyone be cool." So I took them on a super cautious, limited tour of the building. And again, so I had 2 weird occurrences, beginning and end. And then like one more little short thing in the middle. It was like in between the 2 key incidents was when we were inside the building. I was mid talking about ghosts, and this lady interrupted me and said, "Is the ghost upstairs?" And I was like, "Yeah, we're actually about to go upstairs and hear some stories. Why?" And she said, "There's something looking at you up there." I was like,
no.
I was like, "Lady, it is my job to scare you, okay?" And so I like played along. I was like, "You see something up there?" And she said, "I don't see it, but it's right there, and it knows you're talking about it." I'm like, "Cool, great, awesome, hello." And I talked to her one more time as we were walking out of the building. I was like, "So you really feel like something is here, huh?" And she said, "Yeah, and it's kind of mad." I was like, "Awesome." So just to recap,
conduits to the spirit world.
Yeah. So just to recap, there was all the stories I already knew about the place, like the reason we were there in the first place. Then there was the first key incident. Then there was the "you're mad" moment, in the middle. And then there was the second key incident where the key wouldn't. Oh God! So the fact that I unlocked the door successfully and all the tourists wanted to walk in, I was like, "Guys, you don't understand."
As we are bringing this conversation to a gentle close, I wonder if there are any lessons to be taken from the undead or the non-dead or the ghostly remains of the dead, lessons that we could potentially take to make our lives better. I don't know. Again, this could be a stretch. I just wonder.
The two things that I've said both, but number one is just the love of the mystery and let the mystery be, and the Leftovers, the show on HBO, which is just freaking fantastic. It surrounds a mystery of why 2% of the world got raptured away, and like with no apparent pattern. It wasn't the Christians. It was just like 2 random percent of the world got raptured away. And I remember an interview with the showrunner who said, "You will never find out why." And like the point of this show is not to solve the mystery of why these people went away. The point of the show is to observe how people respond to the inexplicable and how kind of crazy they can go whenever presented with something that defies their logic. And I was like, I'm on board with that. I love that attitude of just like letting it go and just letting the mystery wash over you. And I'm a big fan. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is, if you hear a story about somebody who used to live here or was murdered horribly or whatever, use that as a lesson to like, oh, I'm not the only one who's been here, and I'm not the last person who'll be here either. Like, stretching history forward and backward are all these other people who inhabit these spaces, and I love that, and I'll always feel connected to it, and the stories help me to do that.
Oh, I like that.
Thank you so much for hanging out with us and sharing your thoughts about ghosts and non-ghosts.
Absolutely my pleasure. Love it. 'Tis the season.
It really is. And enjoy your upcoming trip to a brand new location with more stories.
Yeah, we can't wait to hear all the stories that you learn. Save a waffle for us. When travel is easy to do, we will come and see you in Amsterdam.
Please do. I look forward to it.
Have fun. Miss you.
Did you know that I used to live in a haunted house?
No.
Yeah. So
wait, we're talking like traditional haunted house? Like
no, like a house that supposedly has a ghost that lives in it, that still has a ghost that lives in it.
Oh.
Supposedly.
Wait, why supposedly?
I never saw a ghost. Nothing ever happened. So when I finished high school, I spent the last semester of high school living with my best friend and another friend in a house that her mom owned. And she lives there now with her family. Supposedly, the ghost resides in the hallway between the bathroom and what was my room. Supposedly, he's an angry ghost. So theoretically, like, I was in danger going to the bathroom every night in the middle of the night, which I never felt. Yeah.
Wait, your friend still lives there?
Yeah, she's
with the angry ghost.
yeah. Her
Did she-
son's room is the room that I lived in.
So now her son is in mortal ghostly danger
Well,
if he ever gets up.
apparently the deal is, as long as you're not going and using the bathroom in the middle of the night, which I definitely did. If you don't do that, then it's fine. So yeah, I lived in a still haunted house. What about you? Do you have any creepy, unnatural?
In the early 2000s, there was a gentleman by the name of Christian Longo who, long story short, he killed his entire family and dumped them in the bay. I moved to the area and was working there, and one of my coworkers was like, hey, we're big in the theater community here. Why don't you come audition for this musical? And I do. And in this same series of events, when this Christian did this thing, and he, to appear normal, post and pre all this event, he did things around town. And one of them was he came to this audition. And I very distinctly remember him. We auditioned together. We did a scene or two together. We sang together. And about a few days later, he flees to Mexico, is what ends up happening. But about a week or two later, of course, this is hitting bigger and bigger news, and police show up, and they're interviewing us, and like, hey, do you know this guy? And we're like, oh yeah, I auditioned for that guy. But as far as I found out later, he was going to be cast in the show as well. Yeah, by the way, this killer, he killed his whole family and then auditioned for a show. See, the creepiest part about this whole story, is disgusting as it was, is the fact that there was nothing about him that was like, oh, this is a weirdo. Like, he seemed perfectly fine and normal and would have been probably a lot of fun to be in the show with. Except for that small detail about literally disposing of his family in a bay. So.
Not an ideal castmate quality.
No. I mean, you don't want to be backstage in the dark with an essence of evil and not knowing it. And who else out there is evil that you don't know? Okay.
No.
Meanwhile, if I go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, I feel unwelcome in my own house.
Well, I don't know if ghosts are real. I don't know if it's all made up. Obviously, I'm never going to be the one to have the experience, so that's fine. But I will say, I love what Kevin shared about this idea about, like, don't be so skeptical that you miss out on all of the fun. You know, like, be open to a logical, reasonable explanation, and be open to there being no explanation at the same time, so that you can maximize the amount of enjoyment you can get from these things. I think that's a nice perspective.
Finding those small connections is really delightful, even if you don't have the answer as to how or why.
Yeah. So big thank you to Kevin for sharing all of his stories.
If you want to show him a little love, we've got a couple of links for different arts organizations that you can support. And just take a look at the show notes for the episode. You'll find them at thechangedpodcast.com.
Remember to subscribe and please leave us a review. And if you have ghost stories or unexplained phenomenon that have changed how you think about the afterlife in general, we want to hear them. So please shoot us an email to info@artofchange.com, and perhaps we'll be able to share your story with the rest of the listeners of the podcast. Thank you for listening to the Changed Podcast. I'm Aden Nepom.
I'm Eric Nepom.
And we wish you the kind of experiences in life you're excited to tell stories about. Thank you, honey.
Well, thanks for having me. Am I even here?